In the Gun, episode number 50. We've got a spring game preview for you here as the weather has pretty much turned over and we are coming to the end of the spring practice season. It is In the Gun, your new favorite WVU football podcast. I am Wesley Uhler. With me today is Jed Drenning, the signal caller, our dear Owen Schmitt. He's got T-ball duties tonight, all right? Daddy duty calls on the T-ball. And so no Big O tonight, but Jed and I have got you covered. Speaking of T-ball and baseball, Jed, I had myself a great time last night.
Yeah, I saw that.
Went on down to PNC Park, took my daughter, my wife and I, and our 18-month-old daughter, met up with Chris Austin, who I think you know, and a couple other WVU people, that I know as well too, and watched the Mountaineers and Pitt play a baseball game at PNC Park, of course, the home of the Pittsburgh Pirates. Beautiful venue for all of you that have been there. I'm sure you would agree. And started out rocky. Pitt scored 4 runs early, but all is well that ends well. Mountaineers end up coming back, winning 9-4. Get to sing Country Roads at PNC Park. Pretty cool. And Jed, it's hilarious because I don't want to say I don't like baseball because that's not true. But of all the sports, baseball is probably my least favorite, if that makes sense, right? Like I love football. I love hockey. I'm a big college basketball fan. I even like some of the European and World Cup soccer stuff. It's not that I don't like baseball. It's just a little bit down on my list. My daughter loved it last night. She had the best time ever. She was loving how people were into the game and, every strikeout, every hit, every whatever, people are clapping and cheering. She was loving it. And anytime it would go to an inning break and there'd be nothing going on the field, she'd look at me and my wife and she'd go, more baseball, more baseball, more baseball.
She wanted more. She wanted more. Yeah, there you go.
When we were leaving, my wife was like, wouldn't it be the most ironic thing that you've been hopeful that, your daughter would get into sports if she got into the one sport that you don't love,
I'm pulling for it.
I grew up playing hockey and football and basketball and soccer. I didn't play baseball at all. So it's not that I hate baseball or anything, but that would be pretty funny. But, that's our around campus bit for today.
Saw your pictures. Love
nice
the pictures.
Win. Yep, I posted some pictures on my Twitter account. But yeah, nice win for the Mountaineers at PNC Park.
Couple things there. Our friend John Antonic sent a tweet out recently talking about Randy Mazey's 44th win against a ranked team, which is more than twice as many as the next closest Mountaineer coach, baseball coach. So, but I do think that experience at PNC, irrespective of who you're watching the Mountaineers, all the better, right? But there's not a bad seat in the house. I think one of the wisest moves baseball in particular has done in the last couple of decades is the move to the retro parks, because you're too young to remember this, but you had this movement and they thought it was good thinking. And at the time, maybe it was in the 70s and even in the early 80s, this spate of multi-sports facilities, whether it was
the concrete donuts,
whether it was Veterans Stadium, whether it was Busch, whether it was Riverfront, on down the line. There were
RFK, right?
Yeah. Well, most of them were turf steel traps, right?
Correct.
At least RFK was a grass steel trap, but I think baseball got wise and kind of reinvested and returned to what they came from, with whether it's PNC or Camden Yards or I got to go to a game at the time. It was Pac Bell in San Francisco on our honeymoon, but that was 20 years ago. But these retro parks have really made for a cool experience. And as sports go, my hierarchy would be it's always been football number one. But I'll tell you what, for the Lions,
you are a baseball guy, aren't you?
Well, I always was a huge baseball guy growing up. And you know what? The Pirates found a way. They finally did it. I found myself over time a little less interested, a little less watching, a little less. I mean, it was to a point like my mom, when I would miss a Pirate game, when I was, let's say, in college home for summer break, if I missed a game because they were all on KDKA, she would actually take the time, because she was watching it, to write each at bat down, and I'd read it in a notebook when I got home to see how.
Awesome.
I mean, we were dialed in. But
That's
the
cool.
Pirates were so bad for so long, and I never thought it could happen. But it finally reached a point where my disinterest, I looked up one day and I hadn't watched a pitch all year. And I'm like, how did this happen? But that's what happened. Boxing was right there with it back in the heyday of the Tysons of the world and the Holyfields. And but both of them, I still follow. I'm just not nearly as passionate about either one. But it's interesting how each of us, our backseat sports are a little different than others, but soccer, I could never get into that much. I mean, maybe if it's a huge event, maybe, but
like a World Cup type
hockey's
situation.
one of those things. I think if I was in a place like you were, where I grew up playing it, because the idea of it kind of always appealed to me, the physicality, and it has an outdoor element to it. I just never got dialed in. I think
It's a tough game to learn. It's a lot of different intricacies. Yeah.
And I don't know it, so I could see myself, and I know Big O's a big hockey guy too. Of
He
course,
is. Yep.
he spent a lot of that time in Wisconsin and whatnot. So anyway, it's fun to look at that. But here's hoping your daughter becomes the biggest
It
baseball
would be
fan.
hilarious, wouldn't it? And hey, you know me, I'll become a baseball dad. I don't
Yes, you
care.
will.
I'll
Yes,
get
you
out there and
will.
I'll use all the good cut, kid. Right? That's a baseball term.
Hey, what
right?
did we say before we came on the air? We're talking about Big O.
Give it a ride, kid.
Like Big O texted us a picture. We were going to tape last night, but he was at T-ball last night. Okay. So Waylon's down there playing, and he texts a picture. Awesome picture. That picture was just incredible.
Yep.
First, I mean, if
Just
that's not a
cranking
slice
that
of
thing off the
Americana,
tee.
what is, right? But he's at another T-ball game tonight, and it's like I told Wes before we came on the air. I was like, look, the most insignificant T-ball game your kid ever played in is so much more important than the most important podcast ever taken. So family first, couldn't be happier for Big O. Hope he makes every one of those games. So keep sending the pictures in.
No, absolutely. And it was a lot of fun last night. Big winner. And I might have a baseball/softball girl on my hands, but that's all right. That's all right. It's at least it's sport. At least it's sport, baby.
Right.
I'm into it. This episode of ITG brought to you by our friends at BetOnline. Folks, betonline.ag is your number one source for all your basketball information, stats, news, and scores. You can get the latest odds and lines, including the latest player reports for this year's basketball playoffs. BetOnline is always your sports information headquarters this season, as we have you covered for all your sports wagering needs: basketball, Major League Baseball, the NHL hockey playoffs, right into UFC and boxing. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to get all your betting information, including live betting options and your favorite casino and card games you can also play right from your home. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to get in on the action. Be sure to use the promo code Bleav when you sign up to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. That's BLEAV. At BetOnline, where the game starts. Jed, headlines to get us started here, as always. And don't look now, all right? I know this can invoke some PTSD amongst some Mountaineer fans, and I think really just a lot of college football and college sports fans in general right now. But Jed, quietly right now, and we hope it remains that way, at least in Morgantown, the portal window is back open across college football.
Well, we hope it remains half that way. Right. I mean,
we want the incomings, just not the outgoings.
Right. That's right. Okay. We've talked on the program before, or the program before. The program that initially the window was the second window. We had the window in December, the early enrollment, right around the early enrollment period. The second window was initially slated for May 1st to May 15th. Well, the NCAA Division I Council moved it to April 15th to the end of April. And their thinking was they wanted to more closely sync up with spring balls around the country. Spring ball sessions are taking place at different times. Some have been over for a handful of weeks. Some won't be over for a few weeks. But they tried to hit the sweet spot with it. It's not entirely going to work, but that's why it never dies down. It's a 12-month proposition, as we know. But that's why you hear news like the other day, just this week, in fact, Oklahoma State lost their starting left tackle to the portal. That's why these things are cropping back up again more than normal, and they probably will for a couple of weeks. But again, let's revisit how this works, so those who don't follow it as closely as we might can better understand. The kids enter the portal now, but they obviously don't need to sign now. It also puts them in position. This was part of the thinking behind the Division I Council as well. Instead of May 1st through mid-May, they're thinking, hey, if it's mid-April through the end of April, that gives the kid a better chance to make his decision and get squared away for summer.
For summer ball,
new destination, okay? Whereas maybe May 15th would have been pushing it, but they can enter the portal within these 2 weeks. Now they don't have to sign anywhere, obviously, within the 2 weeks. They can sign much later. But that's where we're at with it. And to that end, West Virginia, as you and I have talked about, we just signed another portal member. We have a defensive back coming in from Minnesota. We're going to continue to target kids. And when you look at Beanie Bishop, that was his second landing spot, Minnesota. And he's a guy that you're looking for a veteran presence, as many of those as you can get on the back end to solidify things. And that's what you're going to get with a kid as versatile as Beanie Bishop. So he's going to be able to step in, and he should be a plug and play type kid that could help us out a couple different ways in that secondary. So, but he's not the last. I mean, we will continue to target more kids that we think can help us. Now, we've already seen over the course of the spring 2 names that we've mentioned. Keyshawn Cobb transferred in from Buffalo. He's had a nice spring at the safety spot for us. And then Montre Miller transferred in from Kent State. And you know what's interesting about Montre Miller? Montre Miller, first of all, he's a twitchy kid. Speed is his game. But he's already stepped into the program. And Coach Joseph's got a hold of him, and he's put on like 12, 14 pounds of muscle. And I asked Mike about it when I saw him a couple weeks ago. I said, now, what's his ceiling in terms of weight? He said, he's probably at it. He said, now it's just about distribution. We want to turn more of that into muscle. So both kids, transfers on that back end in the secondary that figure to help us. And now another one in Beanie Bishop. But I'm not so sure we're done. I think we're going to continue. But yeah, portal window's back open. Stay tuned. That's the new way of doing business. You're going to see names enter, names, that we're targeting, names that we may be losing. Hopefully, as you said, the losing list is much shorter than the gaining list.
That's it. More incomings than outgoings. Absolutely.
That's the key.
Do like Beanie Bishop, though. I tell you, he's got a lot of experience. He's been in college football since 2018. And I'm always welcoming to guys that have great broadcast names.
That's right.
Just get names that have a certain aesthetic to them when you say them out loud.
A lot of alliteration there. Beanie
Bishop. Bishop with the breakup. I can hear it from our buddy Tony Caridi. And speaking of Tony Caridi, Jed,
he had segue that is. That's your first rodeo, huh?
I tell you, it's almost like I do this for a living, baby. Yeah. Our dearly beloved voice of the Mountaineers, Tony Caridi. Pretty cool honor that he was able to receive from his alma mater, Syracuse University, this past week.
A word that gets tossed around probably a little too often these days is prestigious, but there are sometimes it fits. This is one of those times. Mr. Caridi has been inducted into the prestigious Hall of Fame at WAER Radio. Now, for those out there who don't know, WAER is the student radio station at Syracuse. And you're like, student radio? What's this all about? All right, well, let's talk about some of the names who have worked their way through that student radio section at Syracuse. Marv Albert, Dick Stockton, Bob Costas, Mike Tirico, Tony Caridi. Okay, so if you go to the entertainment side, Dick Clark. I mean, this is just a list. The impressive nature of this list doesn't end. And, of course, Tony attended the, again, prestigious Newhouse School at Syracuse University. He's incredibly well trained, but he's also a very naturally talented guy. And those two things came together to forge a career that Mountaineer fans have enjoyed with him as a part of MSN since 1987. I first met Tony in 1987, strangely enough. And it wasn't in a capacity with MSN. I was a senior in high school. Tony was broadcasting the AA state championship game for Metro News in Charleston at Laidley Field. And of course, I was playing for Tucker County. We were facing Winfield, and we ran into that Winfield buzzsaw. But Tony broadcast again. First time I ever met Tony.
That's awesome. That's cool.
And, so
look at you guys now, all this time later.
He was as professional back then as he is now.
35 years ago, something like that.
When you travel Big 12 circles or even beyond, some of the names that you encounter at some of these other schools that we played from a non-conference standpoint, you get to know some of their broadcast team.
Sure.
And Tony is a as you might expect, an incredibly well-regarded guy among his peers, and for good reason. It's impossible to work with Tony and not learn some things from him. You talk about an invaluable resource. I didn't have a radio background. I was just a former football player that, was asked a couple of questions about X's and O's, and I was asked enough times that the next thing you know, they had me co-hosting a show, and I'm like, what's going on? My head's spinning. And so I always had Tony for the better part of the last 20 plus years to lean on, and he would counsel me and coach me and slap me around. And I mean, that's just it. That's as what you see is what you get with Tony. That personality that comes across on the
Yeah,
radio when you know him, that is Tony. I mean, there's nothing more fun and entertaining than when just a small crew of us go out Friday night on the road for dinner and to watch Tony engage and interact with the help staff. I mean, it's like you're on the broadcast. It's like it's the real deal. It's not fake. It's not staged. That's who he is. But you know what? He puts the product. It's a priority. Quality has always mattered to him. The integrity of the product that we put out really matters to him. And that's one of the big things I've learned. And there are times that he needs to take the wet towel to us during a timeout, during a commercial break. And he's not afraid to. I mean, I kind of liken it to back when I was playing. If things weren't going, these were my best friends I'm playing alongside, especially on the offensive side. But sometimes during a timeout, you got to grab a face mask, right? You only got 30 seconds to get down to business. Now they know it. That's kind of how I view it when Tony does it to me and Dwight or the producer or whoever it might be, whether it's the engineer. So sometimes you got to do that just to keep the ship steering straight. But sometimes that happens. But Tony is always professional, but he's always fun. But he is all about getting it done and getting it done the best way possible. And again, the quality of the product, every syllable that's uttered really matters to him, and it always has. This is an honor that is, again, so well deserved. And I'm sure there's many more honors in Mr. Caridi's future. First of all, that's not the first one, but well deserved. And I'm very happy to see it, that the proceedings took place. It was announced way back in the fall, but the proceedings took place this week. We always like to direct you to our friend John Antonik at WVUsports.com. John did a piece on this. I retweeted it just I think it was yesterday. So if you want to go check out WVUsports.com, you can get the particulars on this. But hats off to Tony.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's one of the best at what he does, 100%. I think I've been pretty spoiled in my time as a sports fan that the teams that I grew up rooting for and watching all had incredible broadcasters. I think that's a big part of the reason why that's what I wanted to do after school, and I did do for 2 years. I worked as the voice of a hockey team in Ohio for 2 years before I wanted something a little more stable with less travel and decided to get into the sports talk radio format as opposed to, traveling with the team and being on the road for 70 games a season and that kind of thing when you're trying to start a family and get married and all that kind of stuff. But whether it was Jack Fleming and Billy Hillgrove for the Steelers, whether it was Mike Lang for the Penguins, whether it was Lanny Terry for the Pirates, I mean, and I put, to me, Tony Caridi right with those guys as well, too, listening to him do football and basketball games growing up. Again, I think that's a huge reason why I wanted to do this and got into a form of this for a living, is because all the teams that I listened to and followed growing up had amazing play-by-play guys, and Tony is one of those. And it's one of those like your product of your environment type thing, right? It's probably in the same reason that I don't love baseball and I love hockey growing up in Pittsburgh the last 30 years. It's I think a big part of why I wanted to be a broadcaster. My parents would tell me to go to bed at 9:00 and the game would still be on, and I'd turn on my radio and I'd listen to Mike Lang call the third period of the Pens game, or I'd listen to Tony Caridi call the last 5 minutes of the WVU basketball game, whatever it was. And I do think that's a big part of why I wanted to do this for a living. Tony is one of those guys who certainly influenced me. I've been fortunate enough to meet him a couple times. I don't have any type of relationship with him like you do, but I will tell you this as well too, Jed. You mentioned how he's widely regarded in the industry.
Yeah.
One of the things that I enjoy about being a big college football fan in Pittsburgh is this city is really a melting pot for college fan bases. You've got your Pitt fans, obviously. You've got your Penn State and your West Virginia fans as well too. You've also got Ohio State. You've also got Syracuse. You've also got Maryland. You've got Michigan. I mean, all those schools that I just mentioned are, within a few hour drive of Pittsburgh. Sure. And because of that, Michigan State, Indiana, I've got friends that went to all these different schools because they're all within a 4, 5, 6 hour drive of Pittsburgh. And nobody wants to go to Pitt anyways, right? So they end up going to all these other schools.
Yeah.
So many times I can't tell you when people find out what I do and where I went to school that I've gotten do you know Tony Caridi? Hey, are you a fan of Tony Caridi? Yeah, he's so good. People from Maryland, people from Syracuse, people from Ohio State who tell me that. And of course, the Pitt people as well, too. The Pitt people that work on those sides of things, they all love Tony as well. That some of them that I work
it really
with
doesn't matter, Wes.
He's
I wish
widely
Randy could
respected.
spend. The influence that he's had on so many people, and I'm so glad
Yeah.
you shared that because
Yeah.
the way he's inspired you. But again, first of all, don't tell Tony we're saying any of this. It's
That's right. That's right. We're
yeah,
going to
don't let
strike
him
this
hear a
off of
word
the
of it.
record.
But it's he's that switch never really flips off. That infectious personality that again, we'll be sitting down at some beautiful dive in Temple, Texas on a Friday night dinner, me and him and Dwight, and the waitress comes over. Can I start with your drink orders? Yeah, I'll have a bottle of whiskey with a straw in it, ma'am. And here we go. It's just starting. And sometimes we're walking into a stadium. We're the first ones there. We open the place because we're on the air server.
Sure.
So we're walking into a stadium, and he's talking that way to the security members and the security staff. Okay, and we're walking down, like I think we were at Amon G. Carter one year, and we're walking down the bowels of the stadium the back way. At least it was one of the places in Texas. I get these places mixed up sometimes when I'm reflecting on it. But we got to talking to one of the crew members, and they're walking down the corridor with us, and somebody said, what did Tony say? He made some reference to him about, he was joking, and he said, I think it was Dan Zangrilli that used to work here with.
Yeah,
that his
probably
name?
Dan. Yeah.
What I'm saying is that he was saying this to a security guy in the tunnel at a stadium in Texas. All right. Wasn't it Dan Zangrilli used to be your boss down here? Your security chief down here? And you know what the guy said? This is in Fort Worth, Texas. Wait a minute. Doesn't he work for the Pirates? We're looking at each other like, what? So, yeah.
That's funny.
Anyway, Tony that switch never gets flipped off. But let me tell you, when you need to be all business and it's crunch time, and there's only a couple seconds, we're coming out of a break, and he needs to get something squared away, he cuts to it, and we all get it. There's a reason you do those things. And 15 seconds later, it's like your uncle's done yelling at you, and it never happened. And we move right back on, and here we go. But yeah, he's the real deal.
We're fortunate, you and I have talked about this a few times, right? Like at West Virginia, part of what has made our athletics so great and so memorable and means so much to people over the years is that it feels like we do more with less than most, right? Like our athletic department should be Wyoming or Rhode Island, like those, that should be who we're going toe to toe with, not Pitt and Penn State and Syracuse and Maryland and some of these other schools. We talk about how a lot of times we make the best out of what might not be the best. Right. We don't have the best stadium in our conference. Yeah. We never have. We don't have the best recruiting ground in our conference. We never have. We don't have the best practice facilities in our conference. We never have. Nope. But with Tony, I think we've had the best of the best for a few decades.
I think so. I know way back when. Again, I kind of started just on the Metro News side with some Big East pregame leading into what back then was Tony and Hoppy and the whole crew. And Dale Miller from West Virginia Radio was producing back then. Of course, the venerable Dale Miller of 30 plus years and award winning and on down the line. But it was Mike Parsons who reached out to me about joining the team in the capacity that I now have. And when he first reached out to me, he's like, hey, I want to talk to you about becoming part of MSN. Because I was kind of on the periphery of MSN. I wasn't part of it. Me and Kyle Wiggs hosted a show, and we tried to do everything we could with that Big East show. We were proud of it, but it wasn't part of the actual pregame. The Mountaineer Sports Network, the network kicked in after our show ended, right? And that's a different audience. It's a different legacy, a different tradition. I mean, we all know what MSN means, that brand. And when he said that to me, I was like, no, wait a minute, what? He said, yeah, we want you to join the MSN team and do this. Ooh, immediately. Flashes of not only what Tony had done for so many years that I was already familiar with and even knowing Tony, but obviously Jack and Woody on down the line. I mean, all that, it probably takes a lot to knock me back and make me a little nervous.
Sure,
that first conversation, I was like, whoa, wait, now I'm not up to that. I was like, are you kidding me? Yep. And I'm still not up to it. I just kind of stand off and don't get in the way and don't say the wrong thing and just fly in whatever capacity of support that I can. But all those guys like Tony, guys like Jack, I mean, those are the core players, the key players that built and forged what we now all know and appreciate as the Mountaineer Sports Network. I mean, those are the two most recognizable names to fans, as well they should be. But there's some behind the scenes folks too. But again, we could do 3 episodes.
We absolutely could. But I'll close it with this. And I think Maybe I'll have to tell him this at some point, maybe, or something, if I see him, or you could tell him. I Bleav Tony has said, I'm doing this from memory right now. All right. So bear, this is not an exact quote or anything, but I Bleav in the past, when people have called Tony the voice of the Mountaineers, like I just did a few minutes ago, he says that's Jack Fleming is the voice of the Mountaineers.
I've heard it. I've heard him do it in person.
So I'm correct in that.
You are correct. He corrects them without hesitation, without exception, everywhere, every time he corrects them.
And I love that he does that, and that he gets the history of that and how much Jack meant to that seat.
Yes.
I love that. I love that. But I'll also tell Tony this: to people my age and younger, he is the voice of the Mountaineers.
There's no doubt about it.
I mean, and I think he should be proud of that, and I hope he is.
There's no doubt about it. And you know what? I'll trust you, or trust me, I should say. There's times that I got the broadcast in my ear, I got the headset, I got the live mic on the sidelines. Usually it's the mute button, unless I got something to kick in, because there's things you don't want to pick up down there on the broadcast.
Correct.
But there's sometimes things that Tony will say something, just spontaneously say something, and my reaction is 1,000% like every fan. I just cackle and lose it. The only difference is when we come around to the next commercial break, I yell for Tony, because sometimes his headsets are off during break.
Sure.
I say, get Tony. And I'm like, where in the world did that come from? He's like, I don't know. I have no idea.
Just got to let it fly every once in a while.
Got to let it fly. Yeah.
But congratulations to Tony, a well-deserved honor. And what you said, that might sound funny to some people, like the Hall of Fame of your little, your Syracuse radio station, deal. But
yeah,
it's a big deal. It's like some of these, small high schools that have produced, like Aliquippa here in Pittsburgh, that has produced multiple NFL Hall of Famers out of a tiny little high school that has a couple hundred people. That's that's that radio station at Syracuse. So a great honor for Tony there, certainly. This episode of ITG also brought to you in part by our friends at GoMart, here to keep you going. Make sure you're signing up for your GoMart rewards as you travel throughout the Mountain State and onward. Jed, final headline here before we talk a little spring game on the horizon this weekend. The Mountaineers' next game, at least competitively, of course, for the football team, will be September 2nd, Labor Day weekend, against Penn State out there in State College, Happy Valley, at Beaver Stadium, the second largest stadium in college football behind the Big House. Second in the Big Ten, second in the country. Yeah. Largest that we're going to play in next season. That's for sure. Beaver Stadium, Penn State. We've talked a little bit about this. We've said how we hope it's a noon kickoff and not a whiteout game. And you'll take any, less of a walking into the lion's den. You see what I did there? Is possible. Unintended. Well, this is not official or confirmed or anything, so I do want to make sure that that's known up front, but it appears there has been a leak from within the Penn State facility, a picture that leaked this week on social media that says the kickoff between the Mountaineers and the Nittany Lions will be Saturday, September 2nd at 7:30 at night. Now, I have two things on this for you, Jed, okay? And again, this is unofficial. This is not confirmed, but it was on a TV screen inside the Penn State practice facility. So pretty. Yeah,
decent. We'll get into the how and the why. But
first thing to me is, listen, it doesn't. I mean, you play them at noon, you play them at 7:30, whenever. You got to win the game against a really good team on in a hostile environment. It's the first game of the season. The crowd's going to be jacked up, no matter what. Selfishly, I think you're on this same page too. Like, we like the noon or the 3:30 games just because where we are in life. I was hoping it was at 3:30 because then I wouldn't have to worry much about hotels and stuff. I could just kind of, get a ride there, go to the game, get a ride home type thing. I will say this though. I've alluded to this a few times. I've said this, I know, to you and Owen. I always knew, like, we played Virginia Tech and Pitt last year in prime time. I knew we were going to end up playing Penn State in prime time when Virginia Tech came to. Well, yeah, right. Unofficial. When asterisk.
Not that there's anything wrong with that. But, yeah.
When Virginia Tech came to Morgantown, it was a noon game. I bet you it'll be that way with Pitt this year. It'll probably be that way with Penn State next year. Now, when I bring that up, people are always like, well, Wes, we haven't won more than 6 games in a year since 2018. Do we really deserve to be getting all these primetime games? And that's a fair point. That's not my point, is that it's clear that WVU is a draw. And it's clear that this rivalry stuff in college football is still a draw, because that's why they put us in prime time against all these teams, Pitt, Virginia Tech, Penn State. Like, we could talk about how the unofficial, we could talk about how WVU hasn't won enough games recently, and that's true. And people could say, oh,
Yeah.
you're in the Big 12 because no one cares about you, and all that matters now is your brands and your eyeballs and this and that. Well, yeah, well, guess what? They won us against Pitt in primetime. They won us against Virginia Tech in primetime. They won us against Penn State, allegedly, in primetime. All right, so don't give me that BS. The WVU brand sells, and in the bigger picture than that, college sports is still about rivalry, man. As much as we do all this conference realignment and changing the soul of the game, rivalry is still the lifeblood of the sport, and that's what people want to see. Two programs that have history and that are geographically pretty close and haven't played in 31 years.
Well, let's double back to this and
allegedly.
Allegedly, not that there's anything wrong with that. This came from the @Penn State Rivals Twitter account.
Okay.
So it's not an official Penn State account. As often is the case, what typically happens in the offseason, if you've ever been in one of these facilities, almost all of them have some form of countdown clock. Now, I would imagine if you're opening the season with Long Island, maybe not, but sometimes maybe still, because that's the start of your season. Sometimes maybe still, right?
Sometimes still, definitely.
Certainly, if you're playing Penn State or West Virginia and you have a history there, you're going to have a countdown clock. Now, the countdown clock is often to the minute once kickoff time is announced, and I'm sure we'll have some version of that at the facility in Morgantown. But the Penn State, this is how I surmise this because they tweeted it. They were in the building at Penn State and saw this countdown clock and quickly pieced together, oh, wait, that means that's a 7:30 kick. Look at the bottom of that screen. That's a 7:30 kick.
Yep.
They wouldn't have that countdown clock saying that if not. So it's not official because it hasn't been released or announced or confirmed by Penn State or WVU. All right. So look, you could come up with maybe different reasons Penn State might do that. I don't know. I'm not going to get into that. But that's
maybe it's possible they just said it as a 7:30 time because they needed the time
Penn
to put
State
on.
wasn't happy about this tweet. I'll say that.
No way, no chance.
So this account maybe gets a slap on the wrist. I don't know, but so that's how that works. But the other thing is how the dynamic has changed over the arc of time, especially I'd say in the last decade. It used to be pretty straightforward and obvious. The most coveted game that would draw the most eyes invariably landed in the primetime slot. But in a weird way, that's changed. And that's why so often you saw Texas Tech at a 1-9 Kansas team on 7:30 kick on Fox. Weird things have happened, and there are other considerations with multiple networks involved. Part of it can matter whether or not we land on Fox or we land on ESPN2. There's so many moving parts as to what could impact a kick time in a game like that. But it's not as clearly defined as it once was. And to some extent, it is a bit of a guessing game. I mean, only a select few of the powers that be within those networks could make a truly educated guess. The rest of us, even within the university administration, not to the extent that 8 years ago they could. And they'll be the first to tell you that. But to your point, Wes, either way, it's an opener. I expect to take their best shot. Why do you overlook somebody in your opener? You never do. I don't care. Right now, what we say, they were pegged as a 17 or 18-point favorite. We expect that to drop, but who knows how much. But they get one whiteout per year, I think they do, as one of those promotions.
Correct.
They have Michigan at Penn State later in the year at Beaver Stadium.
That'll probably be the whiteout game.
I can't imagine it's going to be West Virginia. But the truth of the matter is, what does it matter? If, in fact, it lands in prime time and it's going to be a sold-out 100K plus venue for an opener, that hasn't seen the Nittany Lions since January, how much more electrifying, whiteout or not, can you get? So what would that even really matter, right? It's not like we're playing in week 6 and it's not a whiteout.
If it's a noon game, it's still going to be electric.
Just probably maybe not as much. So here's why. Part of it's my place in life. Okay, why I prefer the early kicks on the road. But the other part, Wes, it's just true. Too many times on the road, I've seen early kicks. See, in the Big 12, it's 11 local time, 12 back here. These noon kicks are always 11 back in those Big 12 venues,
right?
Whether in Oklahoma or Texas or Kansas, where it might be. And invariably, the lazy crowds file in late. They're a little more listless and lethargic. But if it's a 3:30 kick, 2:30 there, or it's a primetime kick, they're fully lathered up and ready to go. And that's why you don't want them at home for the same reason. The crowds tend to file in late. They're still half hungover and half tired, just like they are on the road. So in a perfect world, I want 12 home games, but I'm not going to get that. So give me as many 3:30 or later kicks at home as we can get, and give me as many noon or 11 a.m. kicks Central Time on the road in the Big 12. But in this case, I'll take a 12 Eastern kick at Penn State too. But here we go. One way or the other, we're going to have our hands full with a team that figures to be pushing the top 5. All we got to do is find a way to engineer the single biggest upset in a true road game in the history of West Virginia football since they started ranking teams in 1936.
It'll be a heck of a time to do it. It'll be a heck of a time to do it. I mean,
heck of a time. Perfect time to do it. No better time to do it.
Perfect time. No better time. All right, listen. Listen. All right, I've said this on the podcast. Are they taking us
seriously? Are they? I mean, seriously, Penn State taking us seriously. We're sitting here with 2 quarterbacks who really, between them, have started a game or a game and a half. We finished 5-7. We've been maligned for a host of reasons, many of them self-inflicted, and they're coming off this banner year. They're peaking. They got their 5-star stud at quarterback, doing all these things well. That was playing well down the stretch when inserted. They're playing at home in front of 100,000. They're going to be energized. I just can't imagine. Now they're going to be preaching about the rivalry, but those kids are going to look up the numbers and say, "Wait a minute, what are you calling a rivalry?" This isn't a rivalry, because Penn State doesn't regard it as one. So they're going to be selling something they don't believe in. We view it as one. So I expect us to be amped up. What will attract their attention is it's an opener. So you're not speaking past anybody.
You're not flat in your opener.
No, you're not. You are not.
So that's the thing too. That's where, again, like I said, I would pick the game to be at noon or 3:30 if I could.
Yeah.
But if week 1, I don't think it means as much week 1 as it does week 7. And hey, it was going to be a challenge regardless. You better come ready to play. And I will say, Penn State overlooks the Mountaineers a little bit. That's not the worst thing in the world for us. I'll take it if they want to get out to a little bit of a lethargic start there.
Make it as big a challenge as possible. It's going to be a challenge. You might as well just go all in on it. Let's go sold out under the lights. Let's do the whole thing unofficially.
Allegedly.
Let's see. Allegedly. Let's see what actually plays out and is confirmed in the coming weeks or months, or wherever they tend to do that these days. It changes every time.
And no matter what happens, let's do this. All right. I know that, listen, this is far away, so I'll give this shout again. But it was tough, truly, at the Backyard Brawl last year to really just see the crowd dynamic, because both teams were the same shade of gold or yellow, whatever you want to call it, in a very similar shade of blue. If you're going to the game in Happy Valley like I am, wear a gold shirt, wear a yellow shirt or a polo or a jersey or something, all right? So we can actually show on TV how much of us are there and we care, all right? Don't wear blue, and certainly don't wear white, because then you're just going to blend in. Let's stand out a little bit there in what could be an electric nighttime atmosphere, allegedly, at Happy Valley.
The best thing I can tell you, Wes, is standing for the coin toss in the center of the field at Acrisure last year. That was the most intense pregame environment I've been in. Been in some big games, but I don't remember an environment like that. I'd say number 2 was Virginia Tech on a neutral site at FedEx.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Which was kind of a fit. That was a crazy atmosphere. But
because Acrisure was close to a neutral, so there was more Pitt fans there. But it was
so
about
as
close as you can get for a non.
More than numbers, right? Like we've played Texas in front of 100,000 plus at DKR, right? But
you mentioned before, that's a bit of a different type of crowd.
Well, even
they're not as rabid
as
you think they are.
Our first time there, it's on or off. First, it's how good are they? Okay. And second, it's who they're playing. And there was a novelty to our brand in 2012. That was not even close, as electric as I've seen that environment. We played in front of 90-some thousand on a Saturday night in Baton Rouge in front of LSU and the Patrick Peterson team. We played at Auburn. It was a huge crowd in Atlanta with Bama. We played in some big crowds, big venues on the line. But that rivalry dimension to it, just at the Tech game at FedEx. And again, we hadn't played for so long. That's why I think you'd think at Mountaineer Field or at Lane Stadium would have been more electric than FedEx, but there was such pent up energy from not playing them.
It's the same thing with the Backyard Brawl last year.
2017, yes, that for 12 years, the fans had waited to do that. That's what we saw at the Backyard Brawl last year. So incredible atmosphere, both places, but I expect the same, or an
Oh,
incredible atmosphere in Happy Valley.
yeah, absolutely. They'll be ready to go, so we better be as well too.
Yep.
Certainly. This episode of ITG brought to you in part by our friends at Toothman Ford. Make sure you're getting your butt to Grafton for all your vehicle needs, because we all know cars cost less in Grafton. Toothman been doing some great NIL work with the Mountaineers.
Sure.
Make sure you're showing them some love and checking them out for all of your vehicle needs. If you're looking to purchase a new car, new truck, anything, they got you covered in Grafton. Jed, this Saturday, it all culminates. Spring ball. We've talked about it here over the last couple weeks. The spring game happening this weekend. Saturday, 1:00 is the start. There's festivities. There's pregame concerts. There's a lot of cool stuff going on. It's always a lot of fun. One thing though, I'll get us as we talk a little spring game preview here. I here's what I'm looking for. Okay,
Okay.
and it was funny enough. It was the same thing I was looking for last year. And then I'll explain it to you, and then I want you to tell me if it matters or not. I think you're probably going to tell me that it doesn't matter, and you're right. But
Okay.
Who's the first quarterback to take reps? Which quarterback gets the first reps? Now, last year I was intrigued, right, because Jared Deggy was gone and JT Daniels was not on campus, or maybe he was on campus, but he wasn't practicing with the team yet. So I was, is it going to be Garrett? I thought it was going to be Garrett, but could Nico surprise us as somebody who had barely been on campus and go out there? What would that distribution look like amongst the quarterbacks, in the spring game last year? Well, this year, Jed, I'm even more intrigued. I'm saying I still think it's probably Garrett Green who gets the first reps at quarterback on offense, but does that matter? That's one of those things, right? I know in some circumstances that matters. Like, for example, if I go to Steelers training camp, when I go to Steelers training camp in July, if there's, let's say, DeMonte KZ and Keon O'Neal, who are two Steelers safeties, right, that are going to be competing for a spot next to Minka Fitzpatrick. Whoever gets those number one reps for the Steelers on the first day, whoever starts with the first team, that means something. Like, to Mike Tomlin, to the way he coaches, to the history of the Steelers and what I see in practice and training camps, that means something. Like, they can play it off as, it's a competition, it's a 50-50, we're going to let it play out, and all those things can be true. But at times, for some teams, it does matter who's the one who gets that first crack at it, and you can kind of, read the tea leaves there. Does that matter at all for the quarterbacks on Saturday, or is it just going to be Garrett because he's the more experienced, longer tenured guy?
Two answers. I guess if you cornered me, I'd guess Garrett because of the experience, but it doesn't matter.
I don't think it does.
I've studied each practice, and they're doing as good a job as you could do and being even-handed in terms of the distribution of the snaps with the ones, because sometimes what will happen is you might end up starting but play fewer snaps with the ones because everybody's cycling in and out at different units, right? So I wouldn't read a whole lot into that. They're doing what they can to get as true a look out of both Garrett and Nico with as good a competition, and just as importantly, against as good a competition. So in other words, first of all, if the ones are out on defense or offense, or the ones out on defense, I mean, you got to look at those things too. All these things matter.
Absolutely.
So because then you could argue, well, maybe the advantage goes to the guy with the twos.
100%.
Two defense.
Right. He looks better because he's throwing against the twos.
They're trying to avoid all that. They're trying to get a true fair read and barometer. And Sean, I took some notes on this because that's what I do. I'm a weirdo, but Sean Reagan, again, a guy who outside of last year has spent the lion's share of his career coaching quarterbacks for Neil Brown extensively. He's been around Chad Scott. He's been around Neil forever and a day, and played the position, coached the position. I've always known and liked Sean, and he's very transparent about things. And when you have football conversations with him, I really enjoyed digging deep with him. And here's what he said when asked about Nico. Okay, he asked first Nico, and then he's asked about Garrett. What specifically were they hoping to work on and address over the course of the spring? And he said both have successfully addressed these areas, but he said Nico was footwork and eye placement, and whether it's RPO or even in the pass game. Now, bear in mind that makes sense because there's timing and rhythm tied to the pass game. Now, that's something that even in the shotgun, that matters less so than when you're under center. But way back in the day when I started college playing for Jimbo and those guys and Terry Bowden and Jimbo Fisher, we were under center all the time. But it wasn't until I moved on and played for Rich that I was in the gun all the time. That's much different footwork. But I had to learn and try and master that footwork under center, and that clouds everything you do until you sync up your footwork with what you're trying to do, and it becomes subconscious, and you're not thinking about it. It's going to hinder you some. So that's one of the things, Nico, and it makes sense since he just got here last spring, and Garrett's been here longer, right? Now Garrett has been working on pocket presence and understanding things to get to his second and third read in his progression. He's still working on slowing his eyes down. And then when Sean said that, that made perfect sense to me, because I've seen Garrett take some strides in that direction. I mean, for instance, I think 2 years ago when we were at Baylor, and things got out of hand the way they did in the first half, they tried to give him a puncher's chance to get some significant reps and show what he could do. But what he kept doing was not trusting his eyes, not placing it. This is 2 years ago. This is where his game was then. He wouldn't get to his second or third progression. He would simply trust his athleticism. Nope, first read's not there, I'm gone, and take off. He'd find grass or not find grass. He would just trust his feet because he didn't trust his eyes, his arm, and his head. Last year, you saw, once the season wore on, you started to see more of that. Early last year in camp, you still saw a lot of that at Garrett. Early in the season, you still saw a lot of that at Garrett. He was struggling to do that. He got better at it as the season wore on. Garrett's at his best. He throws a beautiful deep ball. He's at his best because he does have an arm. He does have a very catchable, beautiful ball that he throws. If you call pre-snap a shot play and he knows where it's going, boy, he's going to put it on. His ball placement's impeccable. His timing is exceptional. Sometimes with the advanced elements of reads, he struggled. Now, sometimes I see him on tape and he's doing just fine. He looks like everything you would hope, and he'll make that advanced read, but the consistency piece isn't there. And so when Sean talks about Garrett wanting to address that in the spring, he's come quite a ways in doing that. So when you look at those areas that each guy was trying to address, not just since last spring, not just since the fall, but even since the first practice, both on tape, and these are the things I'm watching, have taken some pretty significant strides. Now, he was short on them because they had a bad day this week. Earlier in the week on Tuesday.
That's right. I saw.
He lets him know.
That.
He lets him know, as he should. That's his job. But he has a lot of faith in that room. And then finally, he was asked, "Okay, what will be the deciding factor if this is still as close as it is now?" And he says, "If it stays this close, it's going to come down to who is more detailed most of the time. Footwork, eye discipline, decision making. Are we checking to the right timing thing if we get to our checks? Those are the things we're looking for. But to sum it up in one word, details." And that all makes, again, perfect sense to me. For Nico, he needs to see the big picture. Everything has started to slow down for him, right? But neither is a finished product. But both are much different players than they were a year ago or even 4 months ago. And both, you can make a compelling argument as to either one can help you win football games. Garrett is just, the more you watch him, even in the spring, there are moments where he's just dynamic with his legs. I mean, he outruns angles. He makes something where there is nothing. He's just so explosive and dynamic with his legs. Again, that arm, what a beautiful deep ball he throws. Sometimes he's crisp and decisive with the RPO reads or the route progression. But he's just explosive. Nico, he's not explosive. He's physical. He's strong. He's tough to bring down. He can extend things that way. He can hurt you by finding a little bit of space and wiggling for 4 yards when he needs 3. But there are also times that you can see him make very advanced throws and reads, and his ball placement is incredible. I mean, again, not all the time. The consistency piece will come last. And I think that, the details that Sean talked about, what will be paramount, who most consistently brings those details to bear. And that will be the guy that separates. Now, whether that happens Saturday or whether that happens over the course of the summer.
In August,
I would more lean toward that, if it's ever going to happen, because they're both improving and showing that they're pretty high quality football players. But that's the ticket that everybody's going to be punching when they show up on Saturday, or when they watch on Saturday. They're going to most be dialed in to, okay, I want to see these two kids behind center and where they're at now.
100%.
What's going on there? But in terms of who starts or who doesn't, I don't know that I'd read into it, because they are giving it the old college effort and try in terms of trying to get as even a distribution for as true a look with both of them.
Sure,
with
sure.
ones, with your twos, with a combination of ones and twos versus the ones versus the twos versus a combination of the ones and the twos. So that's what I would look at. But I'm pretty jazzed up to see them respond to the closest thing to a live environment since Stillwater.
Heck
and
yeah.
And then see, because they both have leadership traits, but in their own way. I mean, you look at Nico, and you just see a kid he has the moxie. He's going to develop into that guy that on a critical 3rd and 4, if the receiver screws the route up, he's going to will 5 yards for you, and you see
even if
Garrett,
he has to puke on the football like he did his senior year of high
on the
school
football right before he hits his
on
tailback
national TV.
Yes. And with Garrett, here's an interesting thing Sean said too about Garrett. He said he's always been high energy. And if you ever spend any time around Garrett, wow, it's, I'm kind of buzzing when I walk away from him. He's just one of those kids. He's just full of energy. He's energy personified. Well, he's found a way to channel some of that energy into leadership. And there is, like Chad Scott, there is an infectious nature to the way Garrett carries himself. And so that's a big positive as well. So I'm excited about both kids.
Yeah.
But that's where we got to start. You talked about the quarterbacks. Where else do you want to go with this? Because there's some other things that I'm looking for. What else are you?
I was gonna say. So all right. So I do think, like, pretty safe. Listen, there'll be different people for different reasons that'll have what different things that they want to look at. But I think for the most part, like, if we polled our listeners, what are you watching for on the offense on Saturday? I bet you 90% would say the quarterbacks. Defensive side of the football, though, it might be more of some people might want to look at the secondary. Some people might want to look at the defensive line. There might be some different things. I think it's a little more wide open in terms of what's the most intriguing position battles and things like that on defense. So let's transition to the other side of the football. Tell me what you're
real quick. Let's
defense.
leave with this. Keep an eye on. I'm glad fans will get to see Devin Carter.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
I'm really glad. I'm glad they'll get to see Cole Taylor.
Yep.
And I'm glad they'll get to see where that running back room is. But I will say this, bear in mind, there hasn't been a lot of continuity just because we're trying to be precautious up front with some of the mixing and matching of who's going to play up front. So if you see some leakage up front,
don't panic.
If you think, oh, wow, that's supposed to be the core strength of this football team. And meanwhile, they're getting through B gap and A gap, and they're more disruptive against the run than they should be. This isn't what you're going to see against Penn State. Okay, so factor that in, bake that into the equation. But let's look for Jeremiah Aaron. Let's look for Cortez Braham. Some of these wideouts, who else is going to emerge? Preston Fox, it's his time to take that next step on the line. But moving to defense, first, the back end. I want to see communication. I want to see sound fundamentals. What I don't want to see, at least with the key guys playing together, I don't want to see massive gap after massive gap in terms of communication breakdowns. There's going to be some errors. It's that time of year. You're going to see some of that. You might see a wheel route streaking uncovered up the sideline. Those things happen. Okay. But what I don't want to see is, 2 or 3 quarters coverages in a row with safeties out of position, and they beat us for 3 skinny posts and 4 snaps and these types of things.
Right.
Because you're not communicating properly. Because I do think some of those additions on the back end, that's going to intrigue fans. We talked about Miller at corner. We talked about the safety transfer from Buffalo. Keyshawn Cobb is going to be a guy that can help. Let's see where Jacoby Spells and Andrew Wilson-Lamp are. I mean, both are guys with incredible potential, but can they master the consistency piece? I mean, we saw quality reps out of both of them. When you look at the linebacker group, I've seen good things out of Lee Koba. Lee Koba, I call him all the time, he's a creature of the box. Keep him near the box, he will be wildly disruptive. He's not a creature of space, he's a creature of the box.
Correct.
Jared Bartlett is playing the best football of his career in my estimation. That's what I've seen this spring. And I'll tell you what, the Hawkins kid that transferred in through the portal, started at Kentucky, and then was at FCS and transferred in. It's one of these things, Wes, when I'm watching tape, I'll find myself, if I see a guy make a couple plays in a row, even if it's, sometimes you're staying high and you're going thud and you're not going full contact, but I still want to see, okay, wow, I saw some penetration there. That guy, if this was real football, he would have made a play. Well, if I see that a couple times in a row in particular, first of all, I want to see who it is each time. So I'm checking my chart and checking my numbers, and you have to get the right angle on the tape because it's the checkerboarded coaches tape.
Sure.
And so Hawkins is one of those guys that dude, it's like, he's been on my list. I mean, I'm like, who did that? Wait a minute. You keep getting a penetration from that backside B guy. What's it? Oh, him again. Okay, well, that's interesting. So make a note, So he's a guy that I want to see some things out of. But that D line room in general, I think we're going to have an interesting combination of skill sets in there. And we've talked about some of this youth and how some of those young guys in the backer unit in particular will play. Now, again, unfortunate with what we're dealing with Josiah Trotter.
Yeah.
The injury that's going to table him for so long because his future is so bright. But when you look at Ben Cutter, when you look at James Hurd, Lathan's a kid. He's not a newcomer this spring, but he's a guy with a bright future. So those are the kinds of guys that, again, James Hurd, he has that bend, he has that twitch, he has that first step. With a true pass rusher, one of the things you always want to look to first is his first step. If you don't have that dynamic, explosive burst in your first step, you can't be the natural pass rusher that people covet, right?
Correct.
James Hurd has that, and you hear Neil rave about him, and there's a reason for that. I mean, his future is incredibly bright. Yeah, some of these young kids, I think it's going to be fun to watch them and see where this goes. Aubrey Burks is where you'd want him to be, shoring things up on that back end, directing traffic back there. I see really good things out of him. But I've seen some fun ball skills out of a couple guys on that back end. So let's just see. But again, you're not going to get as true a look as you want with some of the lack of cohesion on the offensive line, just trying to be safe. And, we've had Wyatt miss some reps. You've had Doug miss some reps. Doug's playing more out at tackle, and you have Jaquay and Brandon playing more interior, both. And so moving guys around and tinkering to land in the right spot come August. But if you see some disruption up along the offensive line, I wouldn't read too awful much into that. I do think this needs and will be the core strength of this team. But we could get into the special teams piece of it, but I don't know if you're going to get so much there because that intrigues me. Once we start seeing real stuff in August,
yeah,
that's going to intrigue me too, because I think Ja'Shawn Pope can be a difference maker there as a return man. We don't talk enough about the fact that Ollie Straw's back as a punter and he's being pushed by Bechtel, but he was such a weapon for us down the stretch, and that kicking battle between Hayes, who transferred in from Georgia State, and Danny Kane. So I think Austin Brinkman, we don't say enough about him because of his consistency, but we're trying to cover it all here. I did a full breakdown with Andrew Caridi about a week ago, and we kind of went blow by blow on each side of the ball, but it's that time of year. I do tomorrow morning, I'm taping a show with the Oklahoma State radio team, and this is kind of the conversation we're going to have. We're going to compare and contrast, where some of these Big 12 schools we're all looking at different things at each Big 12 team, right?
Sure.
And so it all starts with the quarterback spot, because we're excited to see how that plays out and where things are there. But there's so much more to it. So much more to it.
Oh, absolutely.
So many new faces. I mean, this is Wes. That's the other thing with this. In the age of the portal, it used to be irregular. First of all, to get early enrollees, that's kind of a contemporary thing.
I remember we talked about that with Trey when we did our recruiting episode. I mean, more than half of this class, I believe, or like close to half, was early enrollees.
And used to maybe get
one or two.
5 minutes ago, that was really atypical. And not only that, but a combination.
Ain't that just the story of college football? What you said right there. Hey, like 5 minutes ago, that was never happening.
No, and between the transfers and the early enrollees, there's a lot of fresh faces that Mountaineer fans haven't seen at all. I mean, I could give you a long list of reasons that I'm eager to see how this unfolds on Saturday, but that's kind of the 10,000 foot perspective of it.
I love it. I can't wait. It is like you said. It's a spring game. You don't want to put too much. You want to take everything with a grain of salt. Maybe is the
Yeah,
best way to say it, right? But at the
yeah.
same time, too, it's exciting. It's a day out at Mountaineer Field at Milan Puskar Stadium. It's the first football that we've seen, real tangible style football in stadium football since Oklahoma State. And it's just always for me a good sign too that spring is here and the weather's really
What's
about to
the
turn
latest
and
weather?
summer's on the horizon and everything.
It
It's been
started.
all over the place.
It
Because
started
yesterday,
90% rain, then it was 70% rain.
well, earlier in the week they were saying it was going to rain, but not till like 4 o'clock, which would have been all right. Now they're
Yes.
saying rain. Now, or at least when I looked this morning, it said rain was coming around noon, which would be a bummer, obviously. But I probably won't keep an eye on it really until Friday night because you know how those things are this time of year. It can all
I'm going to
change
check
in
the
a
hourly
matter of an hour.
forecast right now, and see how far out it extends. We're taping Thursday night. Let's see how deep into Saturday it goes.
But yeah, I
Uh,
hope I mean, because it's been
Saturday,
so great weather-wise lately. I hope we get some good weather
oh,
here.
at 12 p.m., yeah, 99% chance. But again, those things, this time last week, a friend
It
of
could
mine
change.
pointed this
It could
out. They
change.
were calling for rain this time last week, and it was dry as a bone until Sunday night. So,
Right.
but, my socks still having a chance to dry out some Stillwater. So, I'm hoping that's not the case on Saturday.
Yeah, me as well too. Because like I said, there's been just some fantastic weather days here in the last couple of weeks. Hopefully, we get one of those on Saturday, or at least if it's going to rain, it holds off
Yes.
until later in the evening. But we'll have to wait and see. Jed will be there Saturday. I'll be there Saturday. I think Owen is going to try and be there as well too. So if you're poking around, look for us. Say hello. I'll be in the blue lot somewhere where everyone is just being a bunch of hooligans and maybe we'll have some content. We will have some content for you from the spring game, obviously as well too. One final thank you, Jed, to our friends at Fortis for roof performance and financial security guaranteed. Visit fortis.us.com. Good stuff, partner, and we'll have more after this weekend.
50 episodes down. We're halfway
I
to
know,
100.
half a century. So, it's
Halfway to
it's
100.
funny. I forget who I forget the guy's name, but he's like the VP of podcast programming for iHeartRadio. Okay. And
Uh-huh.
he came, some big wig. I think he's based out of Vegas or something, and came to Pittsburgh a couple years ago and was, kind of talking to our whole cluster about how they're really investing in podcasts. And one of the things he said was, "You're not really a podcast until you have at least 100 episodes."
That's true.
So we're halfway there. Halfway
I've
there.
heard
We're getting
things
we're,
like
we're
that.
getting
Yeah.
we're halfway to being a real podcast. How about that? So
And
we'll continue.
we're still trying to line up some guests in the off season. We
Oh
will.
yeah,
We'll have
we'll
some
have some
fun
we'll have some
guests.
fun. We've got some good more off the wall topics that don't really have timelines on them that we'll get into here once we
Yeah.
get past spring football and everything as well too. So plenty more to bring you. If you're going to be at the spring game on Saturday, enjoy yourself. Say hello if you're around, and we'll talk to you guys soon. For Jed Drenning, I'm Wesley Uhler. You've been in the gun.